Maxwell Max Nova stood at the edge of the bustling hall, scanning the room with a practiced eye. As a renowned explorer and treasure hunter, he had attended more than his fair share of extravagant galas, but this one was different. He was on a diplomatic mission to the planet Zelfar, a peaceful world known for its advanced technology and exotic artifacts. It was the sort of place where cultural exchange and intellectual discussions dominated the evening, but to Max, it all felt a bit too perfect. He wasn't one for politics or protocol. He preferred to be on the hunt, searching for rare relics, the kind that had stories etched in every crack and corner. Yet here he was, surrounded by diplomats, scholars, and dignitaries, trying to maintain an image of charm and grace. Max's sharp blue eyes swept over the crowd, lingering on the various alien species that had gathered in honor of his visit. He noticed the towering Zelfarians with their silver skin and shimmering, translucent wings. Their beauty was almost surreal, their ethereal presence making the human guests seem plain in comparison. He found their aloofness fascinating, and while he wasn't one to indulge in their strange customs, he admired their sophistication. But there was one figure in the crowd who caught his attention more than anyone else. Lyra Valfor, the Zelfarian diplomat, was standing by a pillar, observing the guests with a calm, composed demeanor. Her silver skin reflected the soft glow of the chandeliers, giving her an almost celestial appearance. Her long, flowing hair seemed to shift with the light, creating an illusion of stars swirling in her locks. Max had met Lyra briefly before, during his first meeting with the Zelfarian Council, but she hadn't left much of an impression at the time. She was a high-ranking official, sure, but there was something about her that Max couldn't quite put his finger on. She was enigmatic, mysterious even. Max couldn't help but notice her grace as she moved through the crowd, engaging in polite conversation with various dignitaries. There was a quiet strength about her, something far more powerful than her soft-spoken words suggested. She had an air of authority that was earned, not given, and Max found that oddly appealing. As the evening wore on, the festivities continued without any sign of slowing down. But Max, ever the adventurer, was growing restless. He had never been one to spend long hours in the company of others, especially when there were so many relics and treasures waiting to be discovered elsewhere. It was then that Lyra approached him, her presence immediately commanding his attention. She was carrying something small and glowing in her hand, a delicate box shaped like a piece of jewelry. "Maxwell Nova," she said, her voice soft yet strong. "I have a gift for you, something to bring you good fortune." Max raised an eyebrow, intrigued but still skeptical. "A gift?" he asked, his tone light. "I thought you Zelfarians were more about diplomacy than presents." Lyra smiled, her eyes briefly flickering with amusement. "This is no ordinary gift," she replied. "It's something special, something that carries great meaning on our world." Max, not one to turn down a gift, took the box from her hands. The moment his fingers brushed against the smooth surface, he felt a strange warmth pulse through his body. It was brief, but intense, as if the box was alive with energy. He quickly shook off the odd sensation, laughing it off as a product of the Zelfarian technology. "Thanks," he said, tucking the box into his jacket pocket. "I appreciate it." Lyra's expression remained calm, but there was a flicker of something deeper in her gaze. "You're welcome, Maxwell. I hope it serves you well." With that, she turned and disappeared back into the crowd, leaving Max standing there with the strange, glowing box. He was still unsure what to make of it, but the warmth he had felt lingered, a reminder of the mysterious gift. Little did he know, this seemingly innocent gesture would soon change the course of his life in ways he could never have imagined. Maxwell Max Nova sat in the quiet of his quarters aboard the Zelfarian diplomatic ship, staring at the small glowing box Lyra had given him hours earlier. The room was dimly lit, the soft hum of the ship's engines vibrating beneath his feet, and he couldn't shake the odd sensation he'd felt the moment he touched the artifact. It wasn't just a normal gift. Max had handled thousands of relics in his career, but nothing had ever felt quite like this. There was an energy to it, something almost alive, pulsing softly under his fingertips. He placed the box on the desk in front of him and studied it closely. It was made of a delicate, translucent material that shimmered faintly with an inner light. The design was intricate, unlike anything Max had ever seen, featuring symbols that seemed to shift ever so slightly when he looked at them. At first glance, it looked harmless, a small, beautiful piece of Zelfarian craftsmanship. But the more he stared at it, the more unsettling it became. Was it a piece of technology? A relic from some ancient Zelfarian civilization? Max had no idea. With a shrug, he picked it up again, half expecting nothing to happen. He'd seen his fair share of strange, high-tech devices over the years, but none that had affected him the way this one did. When he ran his hand over its surface, the warm sensation returned, but this time it lasted longer. His heart beat a little faster, and he felt his mind start to race. There was something about this box that called to him, something he couldn't explain. Max sat back in his chair, his gaze still fixed on the artifact. He was used to feeling a sense of excitement when discovering something rare, but this was different. It was as if the box was waiting for something, waiting for him to figure out its purpose. Suddenly, without warning, the box flared to life, the symbols glowing brightly in a series of rapid patterns. Max's breath caught in his throat as the light grew brighter, too bright to look at directly. The entire room seemed to vibrate with the energy coming from it. Then, just as quickly as it had started, the glow faded and everything went still again. Max blinked, stunned by what he had just witnessed. Was that some kind of energy pulse? Had he triggered it somehow? He quickly checked the room's temperature. Normal. The lights. Fine. But his heart was still racing. What had just happened? He placed the box back down gently, hoping it wouldn't flare up again. Max couldn't shake the feeling that he had just activated something important, something far beyond his understanding. As an explorer, he had stumbled upon countless artifacts, but this one, it felt different. Something about it made him uneasy. But why? What was it about this seemingly innocent gift that had such a strong effect on him? The silence in the room pressed in on him as he thought about Lyra. She'd seemed so calm when she handed it to him, her expression unreadable. Was she hiding something? Max didn't like to jump to conclusions, but the way she had given him the box, almost as if she knew exactly what it would do to him, made him question her intentions. Max reached for the data pad beside him and quickly pulled up any information on Zelfarian artifacts. He found detailed records on their culture, their history, and their technology, but nothing about gifts or objects that behaved like the one in front of him. There were stories of Zelfarian relics with powerful abilities, but they were always shrouded in mystery, their true purpose known only to a select few. He leaned back in his chair, a frown creasing his brow. Lyra had known exactly what she was doing when she handed him the box. But what was it? Why had she given it to him? And what kind of contract or power had he just unwittingly signed himself up for? Max's mind raced as he tried to piece together the puzzle, but for now, he was left with more questions than answers. One thing was for sure, this was no ordinary gift, and it would change everything. The following morning, Max was still unsettled by the strange events surrounding the glowing box. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, something he didn't fully understand. He had no idea what Lyra's true intentions were, but he was starting to feel that the gift wasn't as innocent as she had made it seem. Max had never been one to dwell on mysteries for long. He was the kind of person who preferred to act, to solve problems with his actions. But this felt different. Max had just finished breakfast when he received a message. It was from Lyra. The subject line simply read, "We need to talk." He groaned, running a hand through his dark hair. Great. It seemed his suspicions were about to be confirmed. He quickly replied, agreeing to meet her in the ship's main hall. As he walked through the corridors toward their meeting point, Max's mind raced. What did she want? Was she finally going to explain the mysterious box? Or had something gone terribly wrong with whatever he had triggered when he touched it? When Max arrived, he found Lyra waiting for him by a window that overlooked the vast expanse of space. She turned as he approached, her eyes unreadable as always, but there was something different in the way she carried herself today. Something more serious. "Max," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I'm afraid there's something important you need to know about the gift I gave you last night." Max crossed his arms, his patience wearing thin. "I figured as much. What's going on, Lyra? What did that box really do to me?" Lyra took a deep breath, clearly choosing her words carefully. "It activated something. Something ancient. The box you were given isn't just a trinket. It's part of a long-forgotten custom among my people, one that has been lost to time. You've unknowingly signed a contract, a bond between you and me. This is no ordinary marriage contract. This is the Zelfarian tradition, one that ties two souls together for life." Max's mind went blank. He had to have heard her wrong. "A marriage contract," he repeated, disbelief lacing his voice. "You're telling me I'm married to you?" Lyra nodded, her expression unreadable. "Yes. The gift was meant to forge this bond, and once it was activated, the contract was sealed. It's an ancient practice, designed to unite two individuals in a partnership of strength, power, and mutual respect." Max shook his head, trying to process what she was saying. "Hold on a second. I didn't agree to any contract. I just accepted a gift. There was no ceremony, no signing of papers, nothing." "I understand this is a shock," Lyra said, her voice softening a little. "But the Zelfarian tradition is not like the human customs you're familiar with. The contract doesn't require a signature. It requires only the activation of the artifact, and that's what happened when you touched it. You and I are now bound by this ancient agreement. It's a powerful bond, one that cannot be undone without severe consequences." Max's head was spinning. He had never been good at relationships, and the thought of being bound to anyone, especially an alien diplomat, made him want to run for the hills. But the more he looked at Lyra, the more he realized this wasn't just some misunderstanding. There was no way she could be lying about something like this, and the feeling he had gotten when he touched the box, it all made sense now. "So, what happens now?" Max asked, his voice tight. "What do you expect from me? I didn't sign up for any of this." Lyra met his gaze steadily. "What happens now is that we both move forward with this bond. The marriage contract is not just a symbol. It is a partnership, one that will benefit both our worlds. But more importantly, it will unite us in a way that is essential to the survival of my people and yours." Max frowned, still struggling to accept what she was saying. This was too much to process in one sitting. But one thing was clear. This marriage contract wasn't a simple romantic gesture. It was a political and cultural necessity. And somehow, he had become a key player in an ancient tradition he hadn't asked for. Max took a deep breath. "All right, I'm in. But we need to figure out what this means, because I'm not just going to blindly follow along. You owe me that much." Lyra's lips curved into a slight, almost imperceptible smile. "I wouldn't expect anything less, Max." As the silence hung between them, Max realized that whether he liked it or not, his life had just taken a turn in a direction he hadn't anticipated. And somehow, Lyra seemed to be at the center of it all. Max Noah stood in the quiet of the room, trying to make sense of everything that had just happened. His mind was still racing, trying to grasp the full weight of the situation. A marriage contract. It sounded absurd, but the way Lyra had explained it left no room for doubt. He had been tied into some ancient, unbreakable bond with her, something that couldn't be undone without serious consequences. Max didn't like it. He didn't like being forced into anything, but there was no denying the reality of it. Lyra, standing across from him, was calm, her silver eyes meeting his with an unwavering gaze. It was as if she had known this moment would come all along. Max couldn't figure her out. One moment, she was the composed diplomat with secrets up her sleeve. And the next, she was standing in front of him, offering him a marriage contract like it was the most normal thing in the universe. He had questions, too many questions. But right now, the most pressing one was why. What exactly does this marriage contract mean? Max asked, his voice a little more restrained than he felt. What are we supposed to do now? Just walk around, holding hands, and pretend everything is fine. Lyra's expression remained unreadable. It's not about affection, Max. It's about partnership. The Zelfarian bond isn't based on love the way human marriage is. It's about trust, power, and a shared purpose. The two individuals who are united by the contract are expected to work together, protect one another, and bring strength to both their people. Max raised an eyebrow. So I'm not your husband, but more like a soldier for your people. Lyra shook her head, her voice unwavering. No, the bond is far more complex than that. It's not a simple arrangement. It's a union meant to merge two worlds, two destinies. What happens between us, whether it's love, respect, or something else, is secondary to the greater purpose of our bond. You may not understand yet, but we are tied together, Max, and we will need to face challenges neither of us could handle alone. Max paced back and forth, frustration building inside him. I didn't sign up for this. I'm an explorer, Lyra. I'm used to following my own path, not getting tangled in someone else's war or politics. I don't care about your people's traditions. This is not what I signed up for. Lyra's gaze softened just a little. I know this is difficult for you to accept. I never intended for you to be part of this. But the contract is sealed. We are connected now, in ways that go beyond our control. I understand your reluctance, Max. I'm not asking you to love me, or even trust me completely right now. But I am asking you to understand that our bond is essential to the survival of both our people. Max stopped pacing, his mind spinning as he tried to process what she was saying. He didn't want to be part of anything that felt forced. But as much as he wanted to argue, something about her words made sense. There was no escaping this, and if he wanted to get through this mess, he would have to understand it. He couldn't just walk away, no matter how uncomfortable it made him. But still, there was a part of him that didn't want to accept it. He had never been the kind of person to put himself in someone else's hands. Max took a deep breath. So what happens now? You expect me to just accept this and play along like it's some big cosmic joke? No, Lyra replied, her tone firm. I expect you to make a choice. The same choice I had to make when the contract was activated. To either embrace the bond or let it tear us both apart. But whatever you decide, Max, this isn't something you can ignore. You will have to face the consequences of your choice. And that will affect both of us and our people. The weight of her words hung in the air like an invisible force. Max felt the weight of it on his shoulders, the pressure mounting. He wasn't ready for this. He wasn't prepared to be someone's partner, especially not someone like Lyra. But deep down, he knew she was right. There were things bigger than his discomfort, bigger than his personal desires. He didn't like being put in a position where he had to choose, but it seemed like this time there was no easy way out. He looked up at her, meeting her gaze. All right, I'm in. But don't expect me to just roll over and accept everything without a fight. We need to figure this out together, on my terms. Lyra's eyes softened, a faint smile tugging at the corner of her lips. I wouldn't have it any other way, Max. Max Nova sat at the edge of his bed, staring at the glowing box once more. His thoughts were a whirlwind of confusion and frustration. He had agreed to the bond, at least for now. But what did it truly mean? He had no choice but to trust Lyra, at least a little, but it didn't sit right with him. He wasn't one to follow orders, and this situation felt like a trap. He had to be careful, stay sharp. There had to be something he was missing. The ship was quiet as he ran his fingers through his dark hair. He glanced over at his data pad, which had just pinged with a message from Lyra. It was short, just a time and a location. Meet me in the conference room in 30 minutes. No explanation, no details. Max rolled his eyes. It was like she expected him to blindly follow her around without question. But for all his annoyance, something inside him told him this meeting might be important. Sighing, he stood up, grabbed his jacket, and made his way down the sleek corridors of the Zelfarian ship. The walls shimmered with soft light, a far cry from the rustic ships he was used to. Zelfarian technology was far ahead of Earth's, everything about it designed for elegance and efficiency. It made Max feel out of place, like a relic from a past world he didn't quite fit into. But his mind kept drifting back to the glowing box. What did it all mean? What had Lyra really dragged him into? When Max reached the conference room, the door slid open with a soft whoosh, revealing Lyra standing at the far end, her figure framed by the large observation windows. She was looking out at the stars, lost in thought, her silver skin shimmering in the dim light. For a moment, Max hesitated at the doorway, watching her. There was something about her that kept him on edge, something he couldn't quite define. Maybe it was her calm demeanor, or maybe it was the way she had handled the whole situation with that unsettling level of control. She wasn't worried, not like him. Max, Lyra said without turning around, her voice steady. You came. Max frowned but stepped inside, closing the door behind him. I didn't have much choice, did I? Lyra finally turned to face him, her expression unreadable as always. You always have a choice. You can walk away, but there will be consequences. I know you don't like being told what to do, but sometimes circumstances demand action. Max crossed his arms. What's going on, Lyra? What do you need from me this time? She motioned to the table in the center of the room, where a holographic display flickered to life as she approached. We need to prepare. The bond we share is not just symbolic. There are forces at play, both within the Zelfarian Empire and beyond, that will test us. The activation of the contract has drawn attention. Attention we aren't ready for. Max raised an eyebrow. Attention from who? From those who would seek to exploit the bond for their own gain, Lyra explained. There are factions within our empire that still cling to old beliefs, and they do not view this union favorably. If we are to survive, we must be ready for anything. Max was starting to understand, but his mind was still processing it all. So it's not just about us anymore. This whole thing has become a political game. Lyra nodded. Yes, it's always been a political game. The Zelfarian people value the strength of their leaders, and now you are bound to me in a way that cannot be ignored. There are those who will challenge this, who believe we should not be united in this way. They will test our strength. They will try to break the bond. Max felt his stomach tighten. So what do? We fight, Lyra said simply. Together. Her words hung in the air like a challenge. Max wasn't sure he was ready to fight anyone, especially over something he didn't fully understand. But he didn't have a choice. He was in this now, and there was no going back. You've got to be kidding me, he muttered under his breath. A few hours ago, I was just a guy who liked to explore. Now I'm tangled up in some intergalactic political war. Lyra didn't respond right away. She simply studied him, as if gauging his reaction. You are more than just an explorer, Max. You are now a symbol. Whether you like it or not, this bond will define your future and mine. There is no escaping that. Max was silent for a long moment. The weight of her words settled on him, heavier than anything he had felt before. He had been thrust into something far bigger than himself, and for better or worse, he was going to have to face it head-on. All right, Max finally said, his voice low but resolute. Let's get ready. Lyra's lips twitched upward, a hint of something almost like respect in her gaze. Good, because the real challenge is just beginning. Max Nova's nerves were on edge as he made his way down the dimly lit corridors of the Zelfarian ship. His mind was still racing with everything Lyra had told him. The bond, the factions, the political games. He hadn't signed up for any of this, but now he was knee-deep in it. The gravity of the situation was starting to sink in. It wasn't just about a marriage contract anymore. He was part of something much bigger than himself. And the worst part, he didn't have the faintest clue what would happen next. The door to the command center slid open with a soft hiss as he stepped inside. Lyra was already there, standing beside a large holographic display. She was reviewing information, her silver eyes scanning over data at an impossible speed. Max had to admit she was impressive, calm, collected, and always one step ahead. It made him uneasy. There was no room for mistakes when it came to her. And it wasn't like he was used to being in the dark. Yet here he was, stumbling through an ancient Zelfarian tradition he never asked for. "You're here," Lyra said without turning, her voice smooth and confident as always. "Good. We have work to do." Max stepped forward, trying to focus. "What's the plan? I can't just sit around while you handle everything. What's next?" Lyra finally turned to face him, her gaze sharp. "I understand your frustration, but we have to prepare. There are factions within my people who won't accept this union, and they'll move against us. We need to be ready for that. There will be challenges ahead, both political and personal." Max wasn't sure what to make of the way she said, personal. It wasn't lost on him that they were bound together by something much more than a simple agreement. This bond, this contract, wasn't something he could just walk away from. It was real. And the consequences of rejecting it. He didn't even want to think about it. "So, what's the next step? What do you want from me?" Max asked, still trying to make sense of everything. Lyra's lips curled into a small smile. "You're part of this now, Max. You have a role to play. We need to show strength, and that means we have to be seen as a united front. We need to prepare for the tests that will come. And, more importantly, we need to send a message." Max raised an eyebrow. "A message to who?" "To anyone who dares to challenge us," Lyra replied, her tone firm. "We may have been thrust into this situation, but we can control how it unfolds. Together, we can show the Zelfarian people and any outside forces that we're not to be underestimated." Max nodded slowly, beginning to understand. "So, you want us to prove ourselves?" "Exactly," Lyra said, her eyes meeting his with determination. "We'll need to be strategic. We can't just fight our way through this. We need allies, influence, and above all, trust. The challenges ahead won't be solved with force alone. This is about playing the game smartly." Max frowned. He wasn't a politician, and he didn't have much patience for games. But one thing was clear. This wasn't something he could back out of. He was in, whether he liked it or not. "I'm not sure I'm cut out for this," he admitted, feeling the weight of the situation press on him. "I'm not a leader. I'm just some guy who stumbled into your mess." Lyra stepped closer, her expression softening just a little. "You are more than you think, Max. This bond between us, it's not just about a title or position. It's about what we can do together. You have strength, and you have a way of thinking that's different from mine. That's why this works. You don't need to be a leader in the traditional sense. You just need to be yourself." Max didn't know what to say to that. He wasn't sure if he believed it, but the sincerity in her voice made him hesitate. Maybe there was something to this after all. If they were going to survive the storm that was brewing, they had to trust each other, whether they wanted to or not. "All right," Max said, his voice steady. "Let's get to work then. What's the first move?" Lyra nodded approvingly. "First, we reach out to the key factions. We need to understand who's with us, who's against us, and who's waiting to see which way the wind blows. We'll gather intelligence, form alliances, and prepare for the worst. This won't be easy, but we can't afford to fail." Max glanced at the display, his mind already shifting into problem-solving mode. He wasn't used to playing political games, but this was his new reality now. If he was going to survive this, he would have to adapt, and fast. "All right," Max repeated, his jaw set. "Let's do this." Lyra's eyes gleamed with a hint of approval. "Good. We start now." Max Nova stood at the window of the command center, staring out into the vast emptiness of space. The stars seemed distant and cold, like the reality of the situation that had just settled over him. He had thought he was going to spend the next few months exploring strange planets, encountering alien species, maybe even uncovering long-lost secrets of the universe. Instead, he had been thrust into a political minefield, a marriage contract, a bond that was more than just a piece of paper, and a dangerous path that seemed to have no clear end. Lyra had warned him that things would get complicated, and complicated they were. Over the past few days, Max had learned that Zelfarian politics were as cutthroat as they came. Every conversation seemed to have a hidden meaning, every gesture, every word carefully calculated. He had no experience with this world of intrigue and power games. But that was the reality now. He was no longer just Max Nova, the curious explorer. He was part of something bigger, something that could either break him or change him forever. "Max," Lyra's voice cut through his thoughts, smooth and calm, just like it always was. He turned around to find her standing at the entrance of the room, her expression unreadable. "We need to talk." Max nodded, stepping away from the window. He had a feeling this conversation was going to be important. "What's on your mind?" Lyra motioned for him to follow as she walked toward the large holographic table in the center of the room. The display flickered to life, showing a map of the Zelfarian Empire with highlighted regions. "The factions I told you about. We've started to gather intelligence. There are several key players we need to focus on if we're going to make it through this." Max crossed his arms, eyeing the map. "So, who are we dealing with here?" Lyra's eyes scanned the display. "The first is the Korath. They are a powerful military faction, known for their ruthless approach to politics. They have the strength to back up their words, and they won't hesitate to use force if they feel threatened. Then there's the Draal Syndicate. They're more covert, using espionage and manipulation to gain power. They may not be as openly aggressive as the Korath, but they're just as dangerous in their own way." Max frowned. "And you think they'll come after us?" Lyra nodded. "It's only a matter of time. Both factions are aware of our bond, and neither is pleased about it. The Korath see it as a challenge to their dominance, and the Draal Syndicate will want to manipulate it to their advantage. We need to secure our position before they strike." Max felt a tightness in his chest. "And how do we do that?" "We play the game," Lyra said simply. "We make our move first. We'll reach out to the factions, gather support, and show them that we're not easy targets. But we also need to keep our options open. We can't trust anyone completely. Not yet." Max ran a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of the situation. This wasn't what he was good at. He wasn't a politician. He wasn't a master of manipulation or power games. He was just a guy who had been thrust into a position he never asked for. And now he was expected to play a part in a political dance that could change the fate of entire civilizations. "I don't know if I'm cut out for this," Max admitted, his voice a little more strained than he intended. Lyra looked at him with an unreadable expression. "I didn't expect you to be, at least not at first. But you've proven yourself already, Max. The way you think, the way you approach problems. It's what I need right now. You don't have to be a master of politics. You just have to be willing to adapt." Max let out a frustrated breath, staring at the map again. He wasn't sure if he could adapt to this. He wasn't sure if he could become a player in this dangerous game. But something in him, the same part that had always pushed him to explore the unknown, to take risks, made him want to try. "All right," he said finally, his voice firm. "I'm in. Let's play the game." Lyra gave him a small smile, a look of approval that, for some reason, made his heart skip a beat. "Good. We'll need to move quickly. We don't have much time before they make their move." Max nodded, his resolve hardening. The clock was ticking, and there was no turning back now. If they were going to survive this, they would need to rely on each other. He didn't know if he was ready, but he was in it, all the way. "Let's do it," Max said, his voice steady. Lyra's gaze softened for a moment, and she nodded. Together, Max Nova paced the small war room, his boots clicking against the sleek floor of the Zelfarian ship. The holographic map on the table was now filled with countless data points, showing the movements of both allies and enemies. The Korath and the Draal Syndicate were already beginning to make their moves. It was only a matter of time before everything would come to a head. And Max had a sinking feeling they weren't nearly as prepared as they should be. Lyra stood by the window, her expression focused as she studied the map. She hadn't said much since their last meeting, but Max could tell she was working through a dozen different strategies in her head. She was always calculating, always 10 steps ahead. It made him feel like an amateur, but at the same time, it made him trust her. She had brought him into this mess, but she wasn't about to let it swallow them both. "We need to make contact with the leaders of the Korath," Lyra said, her voice breaking the silence. "We can't let them think we're weak. If they feel like we're easy prey, they'll strike first." Max stopped pacing and turned to face her. "And what about the Draal Syndicate? They're just as dangerous." Lyra's silver eyes flicked to the map, her fingers lightly tracing a path. "They're more subtle, more manipulative. The Korath want power through force. The Draal Syndicate wants it through influence and control. They'll wait, see how the Korath move, and then make their move." Max ran a hand through his dark hair, frustration building inside him. "This is insane. We're stuck between two power-hungry factions, and we're just supposed to keep everything together." Lyra turned from the window, meeting his gaze. "It's not just about keeping things together. It's about showing strength. We're not weak, Max. If we make the right moves, we can unite enough factions to gain control. But we have to act fast." Max couldn't shake the sense of dread that hung over him. It was one thing to play the game of politics from the sidelines, but being right in the middle of it felt like a different beast entirely. He wasn't sure he had the skill or the patience for it. He wasn't a manipulator, not like the leaders of the factions they were dealing with. He was just a guy who had been thrust into a marriage contract that seemed to have consequences bigger than he could imagine. "How do we even start?" Max asked, his voice quieter than usual. Lyra's lips curled into a small, calculating smile. "We start by showing the Korath that we're not afraid of them. We send a message. I'm not suggesting a full-on battle, but we need to make it clear that we're not backing down." Max raised an eyebrow. "So, what, we just show up and flex our muscles?" "Not exactly," Lyra said, her smile fading into something more serious. "We make a move that forces their hand, something they can't ignore." Max took a step closer, narrowing his eyes. "You're talking about playing dirty." Lyra's gaze hardened. "This isn't about playing fair, Max. It's about survival." Max thought about it for a moment, the weight of her words settling in. This wasn't a game where everyone played by the same rules. There was no room for hesitation, no time to wonder if he was doing the right thing. They had to move now. The longer they waited, the more the Korath and the Draal Syndicate would close in. It was a brutal world, and Max had no choice but to adapt if he wanted to make it out in one piece. "All right," Max said, his voice firm. "What do we need to do?" Lyra turned back to the map, her fingers dancing across the holographic display as she plotted their next move. "We'll reach out to our allies in the outer colonies. They have a vested interest in seeing the Korath and Draal Syndicate weakened. Once we have their support, we'll make our move." Max nodded, his resolve hardening. He wasn't sure if he was ready for this, but he was in it now. No turning back. The stakes were higher than anything he had ever dealt with, but if they played their cards right, they could come out on top. It was a long shot, but it was the only shot they had. "Let's do it," Max said, his voice low but determined. Lyra turned back to him, her gaze intense. "We're in this together, Max. Don't forget that." Max met her eyes, something shifting in his chest. For the first time since all of this started, he felt like maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. Max Nova stood at the heart of the Zelfarian flagship, feeling the pulse of the ship beneath his feet as it sailed through the stars. He could feel the weight of everything they had fought for pressing down on him, heavier now than ever. The time had come. The plan they had carefully laid out over the past weeks was set into motion, and there was no turning back. As he looked over at Lyra, standing by the command center's control panel, he knew their next move could either solidify their power or destroy everything they had worked toward. Lyra turned to him, her silver eyes sharp, the usual calmness in her demeanor replaced by the focused intensity of someone preparing for the most crucial battle. She had changed over the course of this entire ordeal, no longer just the calculated strategist, but now the one who was willing to trust Max, to rely on him as much as he had come to rely on her. They weren't just allies anymore. They were partners in this war. "This is it, Max," she said quietly, her voice carrying more weight than usual. "Once we reach the Korath border, we'll be in full view of both the Korath and the Draal Syndicate. They'll be watching, waiting for any sign of weakness. We need to make sure they see strength. We show them we're ready to take control." Max nodded, his jaw tight. He had come a long way from the unsure man who had first stumbled onto this ship. The man standing before Lyra now had a different fire in his eyes, a fire that matched hers, a fire forged in the heat of uncertainty, betrayal, and survival. He had fought his way into this world, and now it was time to fight to stay at the top. "We're not just playing defense anymore, are we?" Max asked, his voice steady but filled with anticipation. Lyra's lips curled into a small, approving smile. "No. Now we make our move. We show them that we can't be ignored. We have allies, we have resources, and we have something the Korath and Draal Syndicate don't: unpredictability." Max took a deep breath, trying to settle the rush of adrenaline building in his veins. He wasn't entirely sure how unpredictable they were, but one thing was certain: the stakes had never been higher. His mind flickered to the vast map of the Empire, filled with shifting alliances, hidden agendas, and power-hungry enemies. They couldn't afford to misstep, not now. "All right, what's the first move?" Max asked, eyes narrowed as he stepped toward the console where Lyra was working. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she tapped a few commands into the holographic interface, sending out the encrypted communication they had spent days perfecting. "The first move," Lyra said finally, "is a direct approach. We don't wait for them to make the first strike. We strike first. We send a message to the Korath that we are no longer just a minor player. We're a force to be reckoned with." Max exhaled sharply, a mix of disbelief and excitement rushing through him. He wasn't sure they could afford to go on the offensive like this, but Lyra had never led him astray before. If anyone could make it work, it was her. "Are you sure they'll buy it?" Max asked. "I mean, this is a lot." Lyra met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "They won't have a choice. If we move fast and show our strength, they'll be forced to reconsider their next move. And once we have the Korath's attention, we bring in the Draal Syndicate. If they think they can divide us, they'll be mistaken. We need them to think we're united and unshakable." Max clenched his fists at his sides. "And if they don't back down, then we take the fight to them," Lyra said, her voice cold but resolute. "We're not here to make friends. We're here to win." Max wasn't sure if he was ready for this level of aggression, but he knew there was no going back now. He was in, fully committed to the mission. His life, their lives, depended on how well they played their hand. The ship's intercom buzzed, and the voice of the communications officer filled the room. "Commander Lyra, we are within Korath territory." They're responding to the message. Lyra's expression remained calm, but Max could see the glint of anticipation in her eyes. "It's time. she said, turning toward him. "This is our moment, Max. Let's make sure they know who they're dealing with." Max felt a wave of determination surge through him as he moved to her side. He wasn't sure how it would all play out, but one thing was clear: this was the fight of their lives. Together, they would face whatever came next, and if they were lucky, they'd emerge victorious. With a final glance at Lyra, Max stepped forward, ready to see how the first move would unfold. The next chapter of their war had begun, and there was no turning back. The only choice they had now was to win.